Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and it's time for an adventure. More specifically, an adventure time. Now the plan, in as much as I ever have one, is to have Finn riding Jake like a majestic dog horse, which means I'm going to need some pretty beefy aluminium legs to keep Jake and Finn firmly planted in terra firma. Fortunately, I've got a pair of unused chicken legs from my ATST Gundam, which, if you haven't seen it, you should watch that video next, and if you have seen it, you should watch it again, cause reasons. But these are made of extremely thick wire that is perfect for Jake's bones. A little twisting and bending will get my bones back into a slightly less chickeny pose, and I can begin the embulkening of the body with copious amounts of aluminium foil. I'll then follow this up by wrapping said shiny foiled aluminium boned body in a thin epidermis of gray clay. The goal at this point is to cover all the shiny bits in a dull gray clay, thus creating a sad gray monotone potato with legs. And like all good legged potatoes, I'll make sure that he's absolutely caked up. I really feel like I've been lax on my butt cheek sculpting lately, and I can only apologize for the lack of double cheeked up models. I promise I'll be better. Now with the back built up, I can get to work making the front end, or the face, for my fellow anatomical nerds, which in Jake's case mostly involves squishing another big blob of clay onto the front and flattening it ever so slightly, then digging a little hole for a mouth. I'll hollow the mouth out as deep as I can till I hit his crunchy aluminium core, at which point I'll insphincterate his mouth hole and add some lips, as well as the sausage-shaped jowls that sit just above his mouth. I'll fit his little doggy nose into the front of that before boring some holes for his eyeballs. Now, I want his eyes to be removable for artistic reasons, so I'm not going to glue them in place yet, but I'll use them to keep my eye sockets from deforming as I build up the surrounding eye wrinkles and facial details. Also, apparently I took his jowls off at some point so I could better reach the wrinkles to blend them in. Oh, and there go his eyeballs. With all the unimportant facial features out of the way, I can finish smoothing and blending the various wrinkly additions in before moving down to his mouth, where I can fit a little tongue in place before surrounding it with a bunch of pre-baked teeth. Then I'll put its jowls and nose back in place, and it's time to really wrinkle up this shape-shifting bulldog. At least I think he's a bulldog, either that or he's some kind of pug, but regardless, he is the kind of canine that comes preloaded with an impressive amount of wrinkles. Once I've wrinkled his face, I'll work my way around the rest of his body, adding lots of little wormy dealies everywhere that this potato-shaped puppy would have a wrinkle, which for the most part is just kind of everywhere. Once these have been added and blended in, I can then get to work making his feet, which I'll make by squishing some blobs onto the bottom of his legs and cutting a set of 4 toes into the tips and shaping them until they kind of look like feet. I'll then work my way up the leg, adding more wrinkles and folds before jamming some pre-shaped arm bones into his body. I'll then wrap these arms in their own layer of clay, then set him aside while I make his hands. His hands, like all my hands do, start as little balls of clay squished flat and fingered by way of scissor cuts before some pinching and rolling gets the shape I want, at which point I can add a thumb, then press it onto my model. I'll then repeat this for the other hand, then some quick and dirty detailing and repositioning will finish my hands off. Finally, I made some ears by smooshing little blobs of clay flat and adding a little concave to the underside, and I can spin Jake around and add his tiny tail. In my mind's eye, I was picturing Jake rearing up on his hind legs, howling majestically at the moon while Finn rides astride this mighty steed, heroically brandishing his golden sword. Instead, I kinda ended up making it look like Jake's in agony and screaming in pain, which, you know, also works. Otherwise, that's Jake finished, which means it's time to make Finn. Now, Finn's gonna have the same general body composition as Jake, which means he's got aluminium bones wrapped in a crunchy foil core. However, unlike Jake, Finn's gonna get the colored clay treatment, since I can already see time slipping away from me, and this should help cut down on the amount of painting I need to do later. I'll start by smooshing a ball of fin-colored flesh onto the top of his body and smoothing it into a roughly fin-shaped face. I'll then dig out his mouth and poke in some eye sockets so I can fill those in with some blank black eyeballs. His teeth are made from teeny tiny pre-baked talons that I cut the bottoms flat and pressed in upside down to create his wonky smile. I'll then build up his chin a bit as well as thicken up the surrounding area until I've got a perfect face-to-torso ratio, which in Finn's case is roughly 1:1. After that, it's just a case of smoothing all the additional bits of face flat before adding all the little wrinkly details. Now, Finn's not got a whole lot of detail on his face apart from his tiny eyeballs and missing nose, and I want to stick to the original design, so I'm not going to really change any of that. Otherwise, with a face Finn Ish, I can bring Jake back so I can get the proper pose for Finn's legs so he's sitting comfortably on Jake's back. Once I'm happy with how he's posed, I can wrap his legs in a thin layer of clay as well as add some very minor muscular detailing like his kneecaps and his little calves. I'll then wrap his lower half in a layer of blue jean blue clay, wrapping it around his legs and up to his waist. A quick addition of some butt cheeks and some initial smoothing will make a solid canvas onto which I can add lots of little wrinkles and folds in the fabric. I'll then wrap his upper body in a layer of lighter blue clay and blend and smooth it out to create my armless t-shirt. To add the arms to the armless t-shirt, I'll drill a couple holes into what is now a fully baked body so I can fit some armature arms in place. These arms then get posed in an appropriately heroic pose with the help of Jake and an initial wrapping of flesh-colored clay before finally getting a thin wrap of blue to finish them off. I can then add the wrinkles to the t-shirt in much the same way as I added the wrinkles to Jake's body. Finally, it's time to wrap Finn's head in his patented white-eared hat. I'll cover his dome in a thick layer of white clay, then smoosh some little blobs onto the sides to make the ears. Then I can smooth out the clay, add some seams up the sides, then add plenty of wrinkles and folds so it looks like it's made of fabric. And while I've got the white clay out, I'll add his socks, then add his shoes. Otherwise, that's his body built, which means I'm on to his backpack. I'll start with a little lump of foil wrapped in some color-appropriate clay, smoothed and shaped into a somewhat backpack-shaped shape that I can press onto his back. Some more shaping in place will turn this lump of green into a lump of green that kind of looks like a backpack, at which point I'll add lots of little stitches around the perimeter. I'll attach a top flap to the top of the backpack as well as a little pocket to the center, then more stitches, a little latch, and a final little oval on the top will finish it off. I can then add the shoulder straps, and that's my backpack done. Now I'm going to deviate from the norm to make Finn's hands directly on his body to add a little excitement to my life, but I'm only going to make his left hand with any detail since I need to make his sword before I can finish the right hand. For now, I'll make a tiny fleshy mitten with a thumb, then get on to making said sword. Now I've already made the body of the sword with a grip on one end, then I can slide a hilt down and glue in place. I'll then wrap the exposed rebar blade in a layer of banana yellow clay, which I'll smoosh into a kinda sword-shaped shape. After some cutting down with my knife, I can bake it to lock it in place, then sand it into its final sword shape. Finally, a little strategic knife work will add the nicks and scratches to the sword, and it's ready to be fit into Finn's waiting fingers. I'll wrap his meat mitten around the sword's grip before carving some fingers out so it looks like he's holding the sword aloft. Finally, I'll bring Jake back for a last final positioning and to add some final details to the fingers while they're in place, and that's the sculpting completely finished. However, Jake's monotone coloring looks a little out of place, so it's time to do some painting. Before that though, I'm gonna pop his eyeballs out. Now I could have sculpted Jake in yellow clay, but I knew I was going to spray him yellow anyways, and the gray clay tends to be a little easier to work with since it's not quite as sticky, and painting him yellow with the airbrush is easy enough. Also, while I've got the airbrush out, I'll give his eye sockets a blast of black. The inside of his mouth I'll paint a couple shades of pink as well as the undersides of his ears, then I can give his teeth a touch of white before painting his nose black. Now at this point I could call it done and Jake would look great, but I really want to lean into the realistic look, which means I need to give Jake some fur, which means I need to break out my bag of lung-coating static grass. I bought so much of this stuff and I'm desperately trying to use it up so I never have to use it again. Normally I use my static grass box to apply this stuff, but that just launches yellow fibers over my entire studio, so I want to see how it behaves in a normal applicator. I'll paint Jake's body with a thick layer of PVA glue, leaving the arms and legs free to make sure the glue doesn't dry before I get the fur in place. Then it's just a case of shaking the applicator, trying to get a layer of fur over every bit of glue. I can then go back and do the same again for the arms and legs. Realistically, I could have done it all at once without issue, but doing it in stages didn't cause any issues either since the original layer of glue was still wet anyways. With that though, I can set Jake aside to dry while I take an hour or two to clean up the studio and cough my lungs clean. I am wearing a respirator, but this stuff hangs in the air for hours afterwards, and I think every time I use it, I lose a week or so off my life. After I'd cleaned up, I realized I'd forgotten to dust his ears as well, so I made another mess, then I can glue them in place. I also painted his eyeballs white, but decided they were maybe a bit too white, so I'll use a little red on a sponge to add some color to them before sticking them on some toothpicks and coating them in UV resin. With that though, I can glue the eyeballs in place, and that's Jake finished and looking absolutely terrific. Although he does kind of look like he's screaming in abject terror while ants run around on his eyeballs. Which I don't hate. Back to Finn, I can start to add a bit of color to his already colored colors. Using some very thin, very watery paints, I'll add some highlights to his face before washing his skin in a super watery red to bring some warmth to his skin, followed by some dotting of a super thin blue to add some subsurface veins. I'll then coat the inside of his mouth with a mouth-colored color, washing the paint off his already tooth-colored teeth before painting his black eyes even blacker. As for the rest of his outfit, I'll basically go through the colors, adding matching washes of slightly darker shades to add shading, and the backpack, which is two-toned, I'll paint the bottom half with a darker green. Then the sword can get an orangey wash to bring the scratches to the front, and I can start to work my way back through the colors using opaque, lighter shades to add some edge highlighting to highlight all the edges. For the softer fabrics like the shirt, shorts, and hat, instead of edge highlighting, I'll aggressively dry brush over the top, which will add some texture as well as knock down some of the gloss from the washes. For the face and limbs though, I want to bring that gloss up a tiny bit, so I'm going to give everything a nice healthy coat of satin varnish, which will make Finn look kinda sweaty, which is actually perfect. His eyes though get a full gloss varnish to make them extra shiny. With that though, Finn is looking exceptionally unsettling and he's ready to be mounted on his glorious steed. Because of the fur, I don't think the glue is going to have a good enough hold to keep Finn from falling off the back, so I'll very carefully give him a new butthole that I can jam a rod into so I can add a matching back hole to Jake, thus facilitating a completely invisible mounting solution. Really, if you didn't know it was there, then you wouldn't know it was there. Otherwise, with my shockingly heroic duo done, I just need something to mount them on. And for that, I'm going to use this thick block of MDF. It's one solid piece of glued sawdust, and it'll be more than enough to hold these guys upright. But a solid wooden base is a little boring, so I'm going to paint it black, then I can mix up a pot of homemade mud. My recipe for homemade mud calls for 1 part hole filler, 1 part sand, another part sand, 1 part glue, and 1 part brown paint. Mix this all together until you've got a delicious, crunchy peanut butter alternative, and spread that over the blackened base. After a few hours, it's rock hard, but it's a little too tan, so I'll paint it with a darker brown. Then once that's dried, I can add a little bit more PVA glue so that I can turn this block of mud into a lovely grass field. Finally, I can drill a couple holes into the base, pop Jake's exposed underfoot bones into the holes, and, well, that's us done here, and onto the Glamour Shots. As always, a big ol' thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are you to the newest of them, Jet Lila and Letty, Official Moo, Stephen Ray, Damian Woodham, Decky Dota 119, Ronnie Westerby, Lima Victor Whiskey, Aaron S, Noah Thomas Calcanian, Romsols, AJS Reviews 123, Careless Illy, Angela Holm, Tony Pepperoni, L the Drappin, Valkyrie, Only Got This For You Adam, Jessica Cope, Wormbelly, Ragnar and Talia, Jan, Mike Worthy, Jadersta, Maybe Crafter, Ivan Hunter Johnson, and ... You are the mighty shape-shifting yellow dog upon which this channel rides. Remember, sucking at something is the first step in becoming sorta good at something. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.